Order. I call this meeting to order. Good morning. In light of the chair and vice chair's absence, the committee must elect an acting chair for today's meeting from among the members present. The floor is now open for nominations. Mr. Smith?
I nominate MLA Taggart.
Are there any other nominations? No? All right then. With that, MLA Taggart? Yes, sir.
My coffee? Or you'll keep me straight?
Try.
Thank you very much. How do you say it?
I don't come with a nice fair shirt.
Thank you.
It doesn't have to be whether you're doing so with a German or a English. You're probably safe saying fair shirt.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this this meeting of the Natural Resources Economic Development Committee to order for Tuesday, December 20th, 2022. Sorry. I'm Tom Taggart. I'm the MLA for Colchester North, and I'm chairman-elect for this committee for today. I welcome our guests and look forward to our discussion today. Today we will hear from presenters regarding provincial government investment in the Verschuren Center. Verschuren Center. I'll get that right at the end of the meeting. Okay. Thank you. Verschuren Center. Please, everybody, turn off their phones or put them on silent. In case of emergency, please use the Granville Street exit and walk up to the Grand Parade. I will now ask the committee members to introduce themselves for the record by stating their name and constituency. I'll start with Ms. Barkos.
Danielle Barkos, MLA for Chester St. Margaret's.
Good morning, folks. I'm Kent Smith. I'm the MLA for the Eastern Shore.
Good morning. Trevor Boudreau, the MLA for Richmond.
Good morning. Johnny McDonald, MLA for Hants East, sitting in for Chris Palmer.
Hi, Gary Burrow, Halifax Shabakto.
Kelly Regan, MLA for Bedford Basin. I'm not really sure who I'm sitting in for right now. I think it might be Carmen Kerr, but I'm not sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. If anyone arrives late, we'll introduce them at that time. I would like to also note the presence of Chief Legislative Counsel Gordon Hebb and Legislative Clerk Tamer Nesiba? Nusebi. It says here. Okay, thank you. Tamer. Yes, MLA Burrow, please.
I just want to say that Lisa LaChance is with the fiscal update meeting across the hall, and she'll be here shortly.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, so today's topic is provincial government's investment in the Verschuren Center, and I welcome our witnesses and ask them to introduce themselves, and then ask them to begin with their opening remarks. And I'll start with Deputy Farmer.
Good morning, Scott Farmer, Deputy Minister of Economic Development.
And I'm Beth Mason, CEO of the Verschuren Centre.
Verschuren, yeah. Thank you. So do either of you folks have opening remarks, please, Deputy Farmer, please?
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to be here to contribute to today's discussion around the work of the Verschuren Center for Sustainability and Energy and the Environment. Nova Scotia has a great track record for innovation and is quickly becoming a hub for successful and innovation-based startups. As government, we work to create the conditions for business and industries to thrive, but our partners like the Verschuren Center play the key role in our success. When we look at the Minister's mandate for the Department of Economic Development, two key areas are focusing on innovation-driven green and sustainable businesses and working with partners to enable entrepreneurs to start and scale their businesses across the province, and actively encouraging innovative, sustainable, and green businesses to establish or relocate to the province. The Verschuren Center is an excellent example of how we can advance these mandates. Dr. Mason and her team are true leaders in promoting sustainability and helping to accelerate growth for the clean tech sector. Many companies from across the globe have set their sights on Nova Scotia because of the extraordinary work happening at the Verschuren Centre. The Centre helps clean tech companies develop and commercialize innovative and sustainable technologies. These companies then help to diversify Nova Scotia's economy by providing new opportunities for clean tech jobs and increasing investment across the province, particularly in Cape Breton. Dr. Mason and her team are constantly evolving and responding to the sector's needs while making connections for businesses through their living laboratory to develop new bioeconomy and green energy solutions. In addition to the wealth of expertise and talent the Centre hosts, it is also an impressive facility. This past June, Minister Corkum-Greek announced $2.5 million for the Verschuren Centre to support its expansion into a national biomanufacturing centre, the first of its kind in Canada. The Verschuren Centre is also home to a bioreactor, one of only 3 in Canada, but its expansion into a national centre will increase its capacity by more than 10 times. The new facility will help companies accelerate and scale up their product development in ways that are not yet available elsewhere. The expansion will also help the Verschuren Centre attract top talent from across the globe. One of the strengths of this partnership is that we have a shared goal to enhance environmental and economic sustainability here in Nova Scotia. The province is proud to support the Centre's expansion, and we look forward to their continued growth and success. Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words this morning. And with the permission of the chair, we'd like to show the short video that illustrates the experience of one company at the Verschuren Centre.
Please, go ahead. Yes.
We're helping to reduce the cost and carbon footprint of concrete products using biologically derived nanomaterials, something we call biographene. Well, graphene has shown a lot of promise as an additive for composite materials like concrete for quite some time. However, graphene is quite expensive and comes from mineral graphite normally, which is mined from the ground, which is quite a complicated process and has a high carbon footprint. And there's also large demand for graphene for other applications like electric cars, etc. And we realized a few years ago that nature produces something that is very similar to graphene, and that comes from woody materials. And we work to take those woody materials to make basically a zero carbon or carbon negative alternative to mineral graphene for use in composites like concrete. So we're in the product development stage, and we also just finished a big hiring cycle. We now have 6 very talented engineers and scientists working on our team, which are critical to finalize the development. We are currently operating a benchtop pilot unit at the Verschuren Centre, and we just commissioned a larger commercial pilot in the industrial park here in Sydney alongside the Verschuren Centre. And we're now using those 2 facilities to finalize the development of our first products and get them into customers' hands. The InnovaCorp and Verschuren Centre teams, they've created quite an environment here for companies like ours to rapidly access capital and equipment that's really needed to develop complicated technical products. We find everybody easy to get along with out here too, and things move quickly. People are really committed to the cause of this startup ecosystem, and yeah, we're really happy to be here. I think it's a really unique opportunity that Cape Breton offers here in Nova Scotia in the Ascend Bio program for companies like Alter Biota. My name is Mark Mazzotti, and I'm CEO and co-founder of Alter Biota.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Mason, you have some comments?
I have a few slides, if that's all right,
Yes,
Mr.
please.
Chair.
Yep.
I just want to introduce the Verschuren Centre and really what we do, which I'd like to say I have a 3-minute elevator pitch, but it doesn't work that way. We just seem to keep expanding and doing more. So it's a little bit of a unique entity, the Verschuren. It's a not-for-profit pulled out of a university setting. was built basically to be a bridge to the new economy on the back of the closure of traditional industries. And to do that, we felt it was important to be an independent entity. Since we were independent 3.5 years ago, we've grown exponentially. And that's because of our business model. And I just want to give a little bit of background as to what that business model is so that everybody kind of gets a grasp of what we do. It's very difficult not to be trying to solve everybody's problems. So we keep pulling that in to what I call two backbones of what every large corporate, municipal, federal, provincial government needs. And that is greening our supply chain and reducing our carbon footprint. And when you distill it like that, everything we do touches those pieces. So we have two sides of our business. One is focused around biomanufacturing. That is everything that you currently make, wear, use that's petrochemical based, we can make from bugs, as I call them, the non-technical term for synthetic biology. Or we can extract from base resources. And on the other side, we basically help companies to model their net zero pathway and pull in technologies to do that on the thermal side. And to do that, because we're in the clean tech space, that means investment in large capital equipment. So it's not like the IT space where you give me a bench, I can send you 1 million beta versions, poof, we're out there in the market. It needs big capital plant, and a lot of those SME companies are at a stage where they can't find that 1 million for the first plant that they don't need when they need the 5 million for the next plant. And that's really where we fit. We started 3 years ago building that capital infrastructure, and as we were talking earlier, building a pipeline of companies that need that, and we saw that need across North America. So we basically take in clients who exited an accelerator, so they've gone through a university, they've gone through an incubator, they've gone through an accelerator, and they've been refined down to somewhat well de-risked and ready to scale. And so that's where we step in and we surround them with partners in the Nova Scotia ecosystem that can pull non-dilutive funding, venture funding to their journey through our technical platforms. I'd like to say that's all we do, but SME companies need a little bit more than that. The key, I think, from a Nova Scotia perspective and from a national perspective, and we set out to be nationally significant to address global problems. But from a Nova Scotia perspective, all of our primary sectors need that upscaling, and all of our manufacturing needs that green supply chain. So we're the bridge. The technologies that we deploy are the bridge for upcycling the value of our primary industries and solving the path to net zero for our manufacturing sector. And it crosses so many sectors. That's the nice thing about it, it's the exciting thing about the companies that are coming in. So on the feedstock side, that might be anywhere from methanol to cellulosic sugars to pea starches. So it's of national relevance because Canada has all of those resources as well. And on the deployment side, it's all kinds of things: functional foods, green chemicals, smart materials. It's just phenomenal. So I just want to show a few pictures in terms of investment in the shared landscape of capital scale-up that we've deployed. And we've done that by being quite good at stacking private investment, federal investment programs, and more recently our partnership with the province. So some years ago we started with baseline fermentation, which was our marine extractions. On the marine side, we also most recently got our sea cans, which are for deploying oysters into the Bredor Lakes to rejuvenate the oyster industry. A lot of those leases are First Nations leases. These are all housed out at Sidport, so we have that beautiful building, as we showed at the beginning, but we also have the dirty bays, as I call them. We moved from baseline fermentation into more sophisticated extraction, and then into our pilot facility through the middle of COVID. This was about a $1.5 million investment. Shared funding, again, with help from ACOA and some of our provincial dollars and some of our partner dollars. So we built what looks like a crazy mess, but that is really the top end line, so the Cadillac of industrial fermentation, which basically is where our SME clients work. And our goal is not just to deploy technologies into partners in manufacturing, it's to deploy a team with them. So we have a very challenging model whereby we actually let our clients in our space, and we try to train them alongside of our highly qualified technical teams, which in and of itself presents lots of challenges. On the biomanufacturing side, we've now, having thought that 1,000 litres would get people to deployment, we discovered that all of their investors at that more institutional and Series A level want what we call 10x conveniently. So I guess they're all decimal or something, but we then discovered we need 10,000 litres to get them to their ultimate 100 or 200,000 litre deployment, wherever in Canada that might be. And so we set about building 10,000 litre capacity. And we did that with a stacked model of our own investment from the Verschuren Centre, federal program investment, and our provincial partner investment, which is a great help on a journey of this size for what, in effect, we are a small company ourselves. The important pieces of that, what's the impact that we generate, not just deploying technologies? And we started a program called Ascend Bio with Novacorp at the time, and that accounts for a group of those companies that come through that biomanufacturing platform largely. You saw the video of Mark with Altabiota. He's one of those companies. So it doesn't encompass, we have about 40 different companies that we work with, and we work also with large corp. But this is a snapshot of a core dozen companies over the last 2 years, and you can see their raise in terms of investment. In the first year, there was 14 million. Now there's 35 million invested in those few companies. 4 of them are going on to Series A, which tends to be in the 5 to 10 million investment. Their valuations collectively are almost $160 million. But also from a local impact, their employment is 38 people locally, top-end scientists and engineers. And their expectation is to double all of those figures in the coming year as they enter their Series A rounds. So the one thing that we want to track better is their SDG impacts, because every company we take in targets an SDG impact sector. So typically would have impact and corporate investment. The next round anticipated investment is 58 million. So in that time also, the Verschuren Centre doubled its number of employees to be able to service these companies. So, when you think that's over the last 2 to 3 years, the growth has really been exponential. I just gave a couple of examples here because often the question is, yes, but do these companies stay in Nova Scotia? Do their employees stay in Nova Scotia? And as much as we always said that we would retain the technical capacity at our location, and they would recycle through there, building their technical teams, they're now starting to deploy with partners in Nova Scotia. So you heard Altabiota in there, they've been in conversations with Freeman's Lumber, with Shaw, to co-locate down on their pyrolysis piece down the valley, and then deploy products through local companies on the concrete side. Kraken Sense is another example who came in. We actually modified one of our labs to be what's called BSL2, which is a higher level microbiology. And they have a rapid pathogen detection, which was designed for food industry. You'll all have heard at one time or other E. coli outbreaks or salmonella outbreaks that cost food industry partners millions in recall. Theirs is an on-the-spot rapid detection that allows you to prevent that early on in the program. But interestingly enough, they got pulled into public health testing because they have, basically a lab on a chip And so they've been engaged in COVID testing through the water systems. But again, they are deploying manufacturing with a local manufacturer, Protocase, up in Sydney, and also testing with TrueLeaf in their Truro Bay. So we're starting to see that true resident type impact as well as their national deployment. Cotex is another example. They have seed coatings for fertilizer and seed. And we've partnered them with Copal, who are a polypropylene manufacturer in North Sydney, who we work with to basically test deploy biopolymers. And so they have a large multinational Nutrien who they're partnered with. But we're co-locating a pilot with them in North Sydney. So it's examples of how we collectively deploy big-scale equipment to get them to market. Just touch briefly on our energy side. Most of that's external to our nice little building. We were engaged in the rooftop solar installation at the university. We are partnered with New Dawn, which is the middle picture, at what I call Radar Hill, being a MASH fan, but is actually the low-income housing area, to do a ground mount solar which will sit in the middle of that area and basically take a low-income housing area to net zero. And we're also involved in large corporate mapping to net zero with corporate partners and actually now the harbour here in Halifax. So we have a lot of external projects as well. What's the relationship between energy and biomanufacturing? We're actually going to merge them in our National Biomanufacturing Centre by adding in a microgrid once we're up and running, so we can actually decarbonize our own biomanufacturing and then test deploy thermal technologies right there. So it actually all does come together and make sense in the end. We talk benefits. This was just something we put together on the 10X and the deployment of companies out of 10X across Canada. You're looking at potentially $3 billion investment in those companies when they first deploy, 400 jobs locally and 4,000 when they've deployed across Canada. And that's across a 10-year lifespan of our National Biomanufacturing Centre. Realistically, it would have a 20 to 25-year lifespan. So, and probably just as importantly is the impact for manufacturing on being able to actually reduce their GHG and have a green supply chain, making Canada far more competitive than it would be if we didn't have this in Canada. So I think that's it. Thank you very much for your time and patience. Appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much. I just want to make a comment. It's unfortunate I wish I wasn't chair today because I could ask questions. It's very exciting stuff, and I could ask questions for the 2 hours. I just want to note that before I got elected, I was on the board of Divert, and I see where there's a couple of projects that have worked their way in through there, TrueLeaf, and I think another one there. But anyway, so thank you very much. And before we go to questioning, if MLA LaChance has been away at a briefing across the street, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Lisa LaChance. I'm the MLA for Halifax, Little Sable Island.
Thank you very much. And so we're going to start with questions. I think we'll. So in this committee, it's my understanding that we do questions individually, and we don't do the 20-minute format. Am I right or wrong about that? Right. That's correct. Okay, and so I will keep a list of names here, and we'll go from there. And I have. Oh, before I do that, sorry. I just remind everybody to make sure their name is called before they speak in the mic. That gives the Lays TV an opportunity to get the mic turned on and get everything recorded. So I'll start with MLA Burrell.
Thank you. So I'm just thinking about this, you're saying about the upscaling of value of the primary industries. And I'm thinking particularly about forestry. And you were mentioning about the project working with Freemans. I seem to remember that the Forestry Transition Fund has had some role with the centre, some funding role. I forget the details of it. Could you say a little more about, particularly relative to forestry, where the centre's work is?
Absolutely, yeah. So
Oh, sorry. Dr. Mason, please.
Sorry. Forest Innovation Trust was focused on finding additional value in businesses for biomass, not just forestry biomass, all sources of biomass in the province. So we tapped into that fund to support some of the technology deployment and upscaling that would relate specifically to forestry. So one example would be Alta Biota. And that was to bring technical capacity around de-risking those, so that, you know, instead of them deploying with a partner and trying to do all of that growth on site, that we would collectively do that with those companies. So we looked at de-risking some key technologies that basically are transforming biomass into bio-oils or biomaterials, such as the Alta Biota one, or biochemicals. And there's a number of those. And so part of the Forestry Trust Fund is to support that what we call the carbon transformation platform, is all things thermochemical that will take biomass and make it into something higher value.
Thank you. So yes, we'll have a follow-up with each question if so wish. So MLA Burrell, please. Burrell, sorry.
Thank you. I think I probably need a more elementary response because I actually don't understand. I think this would probably be true for a lot of people. What, in terms of the forestry transition, what de-risking actually looks like? What are the kinds of investments that would lead to de-risking about this kind of transformation-oriented innovation?
Yeah, good. It is a good question.
Yeah.
Good follow-up question for sure. There's a lot of what we call thermochemical.
Oh, excuse me. I'm not. Dr. Mason, please.
I'll get that. You know, a lot of times as a large company, you get approached by people with a technology and say, I've got the answer to your problem. I can make X, I can make Y. A typical one would be carbon black. It's a big component of many things. And you have a range of companies coming from all over the world that say, hey, I make carbon black. You know, how about you invest in our company? How about we deploy at your plant? Or how about you be the offtake partner in this investment? And usually at that stage looking for shared investment. And it's hard when you're a primary producer to understand those technologies and what's a safe bet and what's not. And how far are they down the true commercialization scale? And the forestry sector, you know, with the closing of the pulp mill, is looking for immediate solutions. And there, other than the biomass to energy, there are not very many immediate solutions. So our mission with FIT funding was, let's see how we can de-risk by assessing technology viability. Like, is it real? Does it actually make, let's say, using a carbon black, is it really carbon black or is it just a charred carbon? And how useful is it in an application that this industry partner may need? Does it match what they need? And how real is it in terms of, okay, if you're the forestry biomass provider, can you take everything I've got? Can you take chips? Can you take them wet? Can you take them dry? Can you take bark? All of those things, like, it's overwhelming as a primary producer to be able to try and know what's real. And that's what I mean by de-risking, is our technical teams that we would deploy around that will look at all of those things. What happens? Does it blow up when the feedstock changes? Does it actually make what you said it made? Does it make it consistently? And is it really, when you put it into application, do what you said it would do? So that's kind of what we did with the FIT funds.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to MLA Reagan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for the deputy. The province invested $2.5 million into the expansion of the Verschuren Centre. Government of Canada, through a COA, contributed $2 million. Through the Canada Coal Transition Initiative Infrastructure Fund, another $2.3 million came from the Next Generation Manufacturing Canada, 1.3 million from the Verschuren Center, 500,000 from Denova, which is a clean tech company in Halifax. So the province is the largest investor in the expansion. What was the department's rationale for this particular, and I'm not in any way suggesting it wasn't a good rationale, but I would like to know what was the department's rationale for the investment and how you came to deciding that $2.5 million was the correct investment.
Deputy Farmer, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. So we've spent some time at the Verschuren Center and with Dr. Mason seeing things firsthand and hearing the stories about the companies there and the difference that they're making and the real opportunity that exists in our province to build a cluster around this. One of 3 biomanufacturing sites like this. Really very little opportunity for a startup to have access to this kind of infrastructure anywhere else in the world. And we've seen companies relocate from southern U.S., from Toronto to be in Sydney. And the Verschuren Center has a brand and an international reputation. So it's one of these gems that we have inside of our ecosystem that is a magnet. It's attracting these clean tech businesses. So working closely with Dr. Mason and the Verschuren Center, we received a proposal for how the province might support the scale up to the National Biomanufacturing Center with the 10x and the large scale fermenters that you saw in the photos. We feel it's a very good investment. There's a lot of partners at the table who share the same view, and when we look out 5 to 10 years, it's a lot of jobs. It's a lot of good-paying jobs, and importantly, it's building a cluster. And just to spend a minute on that, there's an American economist. His name is Enrico Moretti. He wrote a book in 2013 called The New Geography of Jobs, but it talks about the importance of building clusters to drive economies. And so if you think about Detroit at one time was the cluster around automotive. So that's where the suppliers were, that's where the engineers were. That's no longer the case. They haven't evolved. If you think about Silicon Valley, it started with hardware and it became software, and now it's social media and AI, continues to evolve because there's a cluster. So if you want to find engineers and software developers, that's the place. We've got the opportunity to build a clean tech cluster in Sydney, and we're seeing the fruits of that now. So all of that went into maybe a bit of a long answer, but it's an exciting proposition here, and all of that went into the decision-making around supporting this expansion.
Thank you. MLA Reagan?
You'd think I'd know,
yes.
Right? You'd think I'd know. So I think, in my question, I think Dr. Mason had spoken about stacking, and we saw that in terms of the investments there. I'm wondering sort of more specifically, how did you decide 2.5 million was the right, and how does this differ from other projects that the department is supporting? I'm thinking of the Buy Local project, where we have trucks going around the province with the logo emblazoned, but we haven't actually seen any announcements or anything. And so I'm wondering, how does the process, the decision making around that, differ from your decision to invest in this particular project? And again, how did you arrive at 2.5 million as the correct amount for that? Could the Verschuren Center have used 5 million? So I'm just wondering how you decided on that and how that differs from this other one. Trying to be very clear here, even if I wandered all over the place. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Farmer, please.
Yeah, so in this case, we responded to the requested amount. Had the requested amount been 3 million, I think we would have looked at it and said there's a good return investment on that as well. And I know that, you know, Dr. Mason's worked closely with all of the funding partners that were available, and sometimes there's thresholds that you come up against in other programs. So, you know, whether it's a COA or otherwise, sometimes there's some limitations on the amount, but we felt that that was a very good investment for the amount that was requested, and it becomes sort of a long-term return on investment type of analysis. As it relates to Nova Scotia Loyal, that's a platform commitment by the government that we're working to implement. We've gone through some stages of both prototyping and brand development to ensure that we have the program that's as effective as it can be in driving demand for local products, easy for consumers to participate in and easy for retailers to participate in. So they're sort of unlike things, I would say, aimed at different goals. So hard to compare, but we're giving effect to an item that's in the minister's mandate letter through that work on Nova Scotia Loyal.
Thank you very much. We'll move to MLA Barkhouse, please.
Thank you. Our government was pleased to support the recently announced expansion of the Verschuren Centre, I'm going to make sure I say that right, into a national bioprocessing centre. What type of competitive advantages will the centre and Nova Scotia have over similar facilities and other research and development institutions across the country? That's what I'd like to know. And that could be to either or, the Deputy Minister or Dr. Mason.
I think we'll go to Dr. Mason first, please.
Thank you. There really isn't another national biomanufacturing centre. There is a 10,000 litre vessel, one in the country, available for SME companies to test. It's at Innotech, Alberta, which is provincially government owned and provincially government run, and so has a limit to how many clients it could put through. And it doesn't have what we're building in our 10X, which is all the downstream extraction technologies. So if you imagine a brewery, you can brew your beer, but after that vessel, you need to get the beer out, separate the yeast, and refine and pasteurize, etc. That's what we call downstream. And that's key. If your value molecule is a tiny piece of that beer, and you need to get that value molecule out to a key client, whether that's a Lululemon as a bio dye or a chemical for a cosmetic, it needs the downstream. So from a competitive landscape, there really isn't this capacity. A lot of these SME companies had already moved to the States, which is why we're drawing a lot from California, IndieBio, because they would have to go to the US to get this capacity, and then we would lose them. We would lose the IP, and we would lose the capacity for them to build here in Canada. The other option is to go to Europe, and I suspect we'll actually reverse that trend and attract European companies here once we've built and we make our next expansion. So from a competitive landscape-wise, I think there's a lot of documented evidence right now that globally there's a bottleneck for biotech companies to get to market, and it's going to become critical, which is really the foundation for why we started the build.
Thank you. Follow-up, Emily Barkhouse?
Thank you, yes. So that leads me to ask, especially where the last one was announcements, what role does the Verschuren Centre play in helping us reach our climate goals as we are trying to transition off of coal? And that could be to Dr. Mason or DM Farmer.
We'll start with Dr. Mason.
From our path to net zero, we work with the federal government's ACE program, which is basically mapping their path out for Atlantic Canada to net zero, and deployment of clean technologies to do so. We work with companies like Irving on the Green Harbour, mapping out a path to net zero for the Green Harbour. That's all emissions-based work. And we work with communities in terms of deployment of renewables in community and large corporations. All of that fits into that mapping of the path to net zero. GHG's emissions, Scope 1 being the biggest part of our challenge. Scope 2 and 3 is the procurement chain, and that's where biomanufacturing comes in. So, for example, as we talked about on the forestry example, if you want to reduce your carbon footprint of cement, which is a big component of concrete and which has got a pretty bad reputation, where are you going to source those ingredients from to be competitive in this landscape? And we have large cement manufacturers. We also have large carbon black users in this province. So from a procurement side, it targets very much our existing manufacturing base and where they'll manage to green their supply chain, which again is classed as Scope 2, 3.
Thank you. Do you want to comment, Deputy, please?
Yeah, thank you. The other thing that I'll note is we're seeing more and more that because consumers are demanding that companies that they buy from exhibit environmental responsibility, those companies are driven by market reasons to do that, and therefore the ability to access products, inputs to the products that they make that have a lower carbon footprint is important to them as well. We may talk about Ficus Pharmaceuticals as part of the discussion this morning, but they've got a plant-based alternative to fossil fuel-based inputs to cosmetics, as an example. So, every industry is drawing on fossil fuels in some way. So indirectly as well, through some of the work that's happening, substituting carbon-based products for natural products as inputs and feedstocks, we're helping to reduce demand as well, and therefore carbon emissions.
Thank you. And MLA McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly before I ask, because I know you're using terms that I know some of them, I don't know some of them. So you keep saying SME, which I assume. So just for, as I love to say, the millions of people watching us, and STG, SME, and non-diluting, can you actually explain those three terms? Then I'll ask my question, if that's okay, Mr. Chair. And that's to Dr.
Mason, please.
Apologies.
Oh, no problem.
SME is small, medium enterprise. And it actually, under most funding bodies, comprises companies anywhere up to 500 employees. So it's not necessarily small. A lot of our client base on the incoming side tend to be small. A lot of our offtake partners are large and probably greater than the definition of SME. Non-dilutive. So on a company's journey to commercial scale, as you can well imagine, you need investment. And it's good if you can start that journey in the early stages with what we call non-dilutive funds, and that is when you go to investment, an investor is going to require some equity in your company. Non-dilutive are those grants, loans, all of those pieces that a company needs to use to be able to get to a point where their valuation is sufficient that if you take a dilution, you don't end up with nothing. And so what we try to do is to map out a client's pathway to deployment in stages and milestones that meet non-dilutive funds, and then angel investment, and then venture capital, and then institutional. And so their path tends to travel along that, and that non-dilutive fund piece is significant to get those clients through that deployment from the abyss that exists after bench scale to, scale up. What was the third one? SDG, sorry. SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So globally, Sustainable Development Goals have been established, as you know. There's something like 24, and they basically address what are considered the key impacts on our planet in terms of sustainability. So they refer to clean air, clean water, replacement of petrochemicals, all of those things. So we're really honestly only interested in companies that have a target of impacting globally some part of that SDG landscape.
Thank you. MLA McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that. I even wrote I put STG, so I'm glad I asked you to confirm it. My question is, the Verschuren is obviously based in Cape Breton, but can you elaborate on what other projects have been done elsewhere in the province?
Sorry, I'm. Dr. Mason, please.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of our energy projects are external, so we work with large corporations outside of Cape Breton. We tend to work nationally with our network. So NGen was mentioned, which stands for National Manufacturing Supercluster. It's no wonder they give them acronyms, is it? And we work with accelerators across the country. That's how we're drawing clients here. Our clients are working with multinationals, so they may connect with local companies. We mentioned the forestry sector in the south end of the province. Obviously, we work with large corporations that exist, Michelin, Shaw, who are also based throughout the province on materials and energy side. That's where our externalities tend to be. And so those would be the large partners in those sectors. From the small company perspective, again, like I said, they have investment generally that's interestingly enough tapping on local venture funds. So we're getting a lot of interest in Halifax and Nova Scotia from venture funds across the country that have a sustainability arm, whether they be institutional or whether they be private venture funds. And so you're seeing all of that kind of circling around Nova Scotia generally. Yes, we are located in Cape Breton for our technical facilities, but I think we don't see ourselves as physically restricted to where we are. We need to be nationally significant, and that's why it is very much a Nova Scotia economy that's building. There are companies from here, but I think if we continue this growth, it sets Nova Scotia apart in Canada as a whole. Some of these companies will deploy locally in Nova Scotia, and the technical capacity being built here will only grow the Nova Scotia economy and the Nova Scotia ecosystem. So we're in Cape Breton, but we see ourselves as Nova Scotia and Canada.
Deputy Farmer, do you have any comments on that? Okay, thank you. So, MLA Smith, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Deputy. Thank you, Doctor, for being here today. I have said this in probably 3 or 4 other committees, how outside of committee, I probably wouldn't have done any research on the Verschuren Centre. No offense, Dr. Mason, I just probably wouldn't have. But because of this committee, I got the opportunity to read about it, learn about it, and understand how fascinating it is and how great the work that you folks are doing is for us and for our economy and for the global economy. So in your opening, the video and in the slideshow, I didn't catch anything on a relationship with Cape Breton University. So forgive me if I missed it. I don't think I did. But I'm wondering if you can talk about the relationship with Cape Breton University and how important and vital that is to the future for the Verschuren Centre.
Dr. Mason, please. I never saw a deputy minister get off so easy at one of these committee meetings.
Yeah, initially the facility, the actual centre, was built on the campus, as I said, with a mind to transition the local economy to something outside of primary industry. We did operate briefly under the university. And although it wasn't funded by the university, it was always anticipated to be a self-funded entity. When you're in an academic setting, that's challenging because it assumes typically you would go after tri-council funds, and those assume that your staff, your faculty, are already paid by the university, so it wasn't a very sustainable model. So we pulled away and separated so that we could then pursue other funding mechanisms to make ourselves self-sufficient. A portion of what we do, an increasing portion, is service-based revenue from clients and from large corps. And then our infrastructure bills tend to be capital. CBU specifically, as a university in Nova Scotia, is undergrad. We tend to pull masters and above. So we tend to also pull nationally when we advertise for our staff, and when our companies advertise, they're attracting talent from all across Canada and internationally as well. So we don't have a specific relationship with CBU anymore, but we do pull, and we have a lot of co-op programs with all the universities in Nova Scotia and with the colleges as well. So we are actually, along with our clients, at a point where we really need upskilling programs, and we need to develop technical skills that are not necessarily existing in the ecosystem right now because we're at the cutting edge. And that's where we've reached back out to the colleges here to look at how we can create, credentialing, upskilling with them in a more tailored basis. So that's really where I think our relationship locally will develop as we build those. But again, we're also looking at program funding through NGen because federally there's a desire to add credentialing. And that's where I think, all the universities and colleges could step up and support this ecosystem build in addressing what are those skills gaps and how do we fill them, and how do we fill them fast? Because right now that's becoming a critical limitation factor on ourselves and our companies. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Deputy. Follow-up, Emily Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, that's perfectly logical and makes sense. Quick follow-up. My line of questioning was on strategic partnership and starting with CBU. The next line goes to the Ascend bio. So we talked, that was featured in the video and a little bit in the slides. Is there a relationship there with Invest Nova Scotia as well? And if you can expand on that a little bit for us, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Sorry. Dr. Mason, please.
The Ascend Bio program was a partnership we started when it was NovaCorp and now Invest NS. And it is a key part of our pipeline of companies. So the investment arm of Invest NS has access to partnerships across the country, venture funds across the country, and early stage investment, which often is key when companies reach that stage of angel rounds. There really needs to be a solid foundation investor that steps up first, and then everybody else follows. And the investment group play that role for companies that reach that goal and are worthy of it. And because of that, there is that network. Paul Richards, in particular, from Invest NS, has those connections across North America. So an example would be IndieBio have a right now a $4 billion investment in companies that there's not one company under 3 years of age in their portfolio, and they have a pitch day. And on that pitch day, there are hundreds and hundreds of venture funds, and some of our clients are pitching on that. And that's a connection that we got by that relationship with Ascend Bio. Other partnerships, so accelerators at U of T, U of Montreal, UBC, they're all coming together. And I don't know if it was yourself or someone mentioned it, that there often seem to be a disparate kind of arrangement of entities where, you've got groups that do little pieces of the journey, but nobody pulling that together. And what we're seeing now here in Nova Scotia, which is basically our advantage in the country, is we have a real ecosystem where those venture funds are coming, the partners in Invest Nova Scotia are at the table, the Innovation Hub is there, And it's what we call our supportive ecosystem. That's what's bringing companies here. You can't get that anywhere else. You can go to an accelerator and take a program, but can you get that full package of support? And we can't deliver that ourselves as the Verschuren Centre. We do it through those partnerships. So they're growing, and they'll continue to grow the more companies come here. So.
And Deputy Farmer, please.
Thank you. I'll just add quickly, as it relates to Invest, there's the former Novacor side, which is the venture capital side, and has all of the connections and capabilities that Dr. Mason described. There's also the former NSBI side, which works with large customers in the province, large and small customers in the province, but has good relationships with all of our existing large companies in the province, and is able to play a connector role to the startups that are there with the larger companies that exist in the province. So there was some discussion about work with Michelin and work with Freeman's, work with Shaw. Invest is in a good position to help build those relationships, and we can often trade a little bit on what I would call sort of our just right size in Nova Scotia in a lot of ways. We're 1 million people. We've got sophisticated assets. We've got some, international companies here, but we're small enough that people know each other, and those relationships exist. So we can connect the research firm that's in Sydney with the head office of the North American office of Michelin, as an example, to explore opportunities.
Thank you. Before we move on to MLA Boudreau, I just want to say I have LaChance, Reagan, and McDonald after that. So I'm looking for hands. MLA Boudreau, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming. As a Cape Brettoner and MLA, Cape Brettoner kind of have to, say how pleased we are certainly to have the Verschuren Centre in Cape Breton. And you kind of answered some of my question right off the get-go, because I wanted to talk about the unique assets that Cape Breton itself has for the Verschuren Centre, and then in Nova Scotia in general. So maybe you kind of talked a little bit about it, but what are some assets that make it a great place for the Verschuren Centre to be located? Like, what is it about Cape Breton or Nova Scotia? You kind of hit some of it already, but.
We'll go to Dr. Mason first.
Thank you. And Dr. Nadine Farmer suggested it was like a little mini petri dish. I always look at Cape Breton as having that ability to be a test bed, because we have a lot of natural resources. So we have all of the renewables that we more than we can use on island, in fact. But we also have the Bredor Lakes, which I think a lot of people look at that and think, oh well, what is that? What does that mean when you have a biosphere? Does that mean we just like protect everything and you don't touch it? But in actual fact, if you look into that, a biosphere is supposed to be an integrated ecosystem where communities around those lakes live and have a livelihood in the lakes. And so that's unique in Canada. And so the oyster project that we have with AFF, and Rod Beresford is our lead on that, which is a relationship we have with CBU. That is to basically redeploy an industry that existed in that Bredor ecosystem, and is a sustainable, self-sustaining industry with First Nations leaseholders and others leaseholders, whereby you are actively working in that ecosystem. And that's why I say Cape Breton actually is perfect in terms of the assets it has to develop those kind of programs. Low-income housing, unfortunately, we possess a lot of that. We possess a lot of people who are energy poor. And deploying ground mount solar within that community it is key to bringing those levels of poverty back up. Another one is our First Nations group, so interaction with First Nations on energy security as well, whereby we can connect our larger grid scale activities with local communities. So it's actually an incredible test bed to deploy those kinds of things. But there's no reason either that Cape Breton, for being where it is, can't be a technology deployment centre for the whole of Canada. And that's the amazing thing. Like, it doesn't matter where we are. It matters how we deploy technology. And that's, I think, the business model that we've got. That's why it's successful.
Deputy Farmer, do you have comments?
Yeah, what I'll add to that is, there's this unique asset that exists and has been built at the Verschuren Centre. It could have been built elsewhere, but that's where it was built. And you can never discount the impact that one individual can have. And Dr. Mason, as a leader and a visionary around this, we're grateful that she chose to launch this in Cape Breton. A lot of other places would be happy to have her, but we're gonna keep her here. When we talk about batteries, people often talk about Dr. Jeff Don and the attractive force that he's been in that space. I think the same can be said for Dr. Mason and the work that's been done at the Verschuren Centre.
Thank you. Follow up, MLA Boudreau.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and I'm glad you kind of brought up the Bredor Lakes and kind of certainly Richmond County. I mean, all the counties are kind of hovering around the Bredor Lakes, and it's such a crucial part of our way of life. And just certainly with the investment in the oyster industry for the Bredor Lakes, it's that our government has put forward. It's kind of an exciting time for us there. Do you have any kind of update on progress with that program and what's going on and how that looks and what can we expect when it's up and running?
So I'm going. If Deputy Farmer, do you have any comments first? I'm going to let you go first.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, but I don't think I'm well positioned to comment on that.
Okay, Dr. Mason, please.
Sure, I can update, exciting updates. I had them in one of the pictures there. You'd see those ocean on land containers. So part of the revitalization of the oyster industry was to be able to grow in land-based hatchery and nursery to deploy then into on-surface grow-out. So one of the things that Dr. Rod Beresford discovered during his studies was a lot of the oysters, so for anybody who's not familiar with the oyster industry in the Bredor, it was decimated by MSX, which is a parasite, and nobody really understood what to do. So all of those leases became empty and fallow. Dr. Beresford found that if you raise oysters on surface instead of in the mud, where presumably this parasite's life cycle is a component, that they survive. And now you can actually grow out oysters again. Problem is, where's the spat, which is where's the baby oysters, to repopulate those leases? So we connected with a UK company that actually builds hatcheries and nurseries in a container, and they just arrived the other day, and it'll be commissioned in January so that we can start creating baby oysters, basically, to put back into those leases for those leaseholders to grow. And Buladek, actually, First Nation is an important partner in that, because they have oyster processing capacity that was built historically for oyster production in the Bredor. So, we then complete the cycle. We can put baby oysters back on lease. They have the capacity now to grow out on surface without everything dying, and then a processing facility to start selling. What were according to our friends at Buladek, some of the best tasting oysters around. So it's a wonderful story. And we hope we see those grow-outs on leases next year. So all the technology's arrived.
Thank you. MLA LaChance, please.
Thank you, and thank you so much for being here. It's certainly really fascinating work that you're doing. And I think it's really a great model in terms of trying to think past the issue of being based at a university and relying on tri-council funding. So I think that's a great story. I think both my questions are probably more directed for Deputy Minister Farmer, but that's not to say that your input has not been appreciated and certainly really valuable. So I think as you know, Deputy, we've been concerned about the lack of an economic development plan that brings together great initiatives such as this with a couple of campaign promises that we haven't seen really implemented thus far. So I'm wondering, in the absence of an economic development strategy or a regional and economic development strategy for Nova Scotia, how do you make recommendations within the department, for instance, to support initiatives like the Verschuren Centre? And do you see any constraints or any benefits in that way?
Deputy Farmer, please.
Thank you. So there's not a document that has a title page that says economic plan, as you mentioned. It's reflected, I would say, across a variety of mandate letters, things that you'll read in the platform. I would distill it down, when we talk about priorities, I would distill it down to sort of four things that you can group most everything under. One of them is growing high-paying, high-productivity sectors. And so when we talk about clean tech, research and development, that's a part of it. There's another part of it which is driving productivity across all sectors, helping them to become more profitable and prosperous. So when we think about contributions to traditional industries, forestry we've talked about, fishing, others, making use of waste from marine processes, for example, that's happening at the Verschuren Centre. That's going to help the productivity, getting more out of those traditional businesses. There's a third part of it, which is around really planting the seeds for the economy that we want to have in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road as things change. And we know that clean tech is a growth area. It's growing way faster than the economy as a whole. It's growing way faster than most every sector. So by putting investments into clean tech, we're doing that around planting the seeds. And the other thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that prosperity is spread across the province, whether that's geographically or amongst cultural groups or otherwise. And so when we're creating new opportunities in Cape Breton, when those new opportunities are being experienced in other parts of the province, as Dr. Mason has described, it's an investment that's helping to spread those benefits of the clean tech sector around the province. So those are sort of four lenses that we often apply to things. Sometimes an initiative hits on one of those. Sometimes it crosses all four. And I think when we're talking about the work at the Verschuren Centre, you can certainly apply all four lenses and see where the positive impact is.
Thank you. Follow-up, MLA LaChance?
Thank you. And I'm wondering, for some of the priorities that we can distill from mandate letters and from the platform, I wonder if you can provide an update. So Nova Scotia Loyal, if you can provide an update on that program and which of the four lenses it contributes to. And I'm also wondering if you can update on the transition to Invest Nova Scotia. So has a new CEO been found? Has the advisory council been appointed? Those sorts of steps.
Deputy Farmer, please.
Yeah, thank you. So starting with the Nova Scotia Loyal, there's been a prototyping exercise that's taken place over several months, working with consumers and retailers, understand what really drives behavior and what kinds of solutions will work well and be practical for them, all against the aim of driving a 10% shift in consumption of local products. There's been a coincident branding exercise as well that's been undertaken to ask people why they're motivated by buying local and what's important to them, and those two things have come together and will sort of inform the next steps in the design of that program. As it relates to Invest Nova Scotia, of course, it's the combination of the former InnovaCorp and the former NSBI. That became effective December 1st of this year. And so as you can imagine, there's a lot of things that need to happen in the background. We closed off financial statements, and we've got new email addresses, and there's a refreshed website and all of those things. The CEO search is an ongoing process that is continuing. The period for applications closed sort of mid-November, so that's proceeding along. And I will say that from an operational perspective, we've continued to see things move along sort of at a normal pace. The work at Novacor and Ascend Bio that we've talked about this morning has continued. The work of NSBI, former NSBI, has continued. You see the regular disclosures on Tuesdays of innovation rebate programs and payroll rebates that have been issued, and of course they continue to work with clients around the province. So it's been, I would say, fairly smooth, and we continue to work through the implementation steps on Invest Nova Scotia.
Thank you very much. And so it is 11:10, and I believe we're going to go to about 11:45 before we ask for closing statements. So we'll start our second round. And I think we'll still continue to have a follow-up until we start running out of time, if that's okay. So I have MLA Reagan, MLA McDonald, Burrell, and Barkos now. And so we're going to go, we'll start with MLA Reagan, please.
So thank you very much for the description of the value of clusters. I studied at the University of Waterloo, so that was familiar to me for the software. Even those of us who were not taking tech-related, sort of got drawn into it, and many of us got employed through that area. So, and it can really change a community in terms of employment and opportunities for young people that maybe often left to go elsewhere. So, thank you for sharing that with us. In terms of the expansion of the Verschuren Centre. How far along are we? Are we on time, on budget, and we are seeing soaring costs impacting other construction projects here in Nova Scotia? Has the Verschuren Centre been dealing with that particular situation too? It's probably a question for Dr. Mason.
Thank you, Dr. Mason.
Yeah, thank you. We're not immune from soaring costs, delays, labor issues, and supply chain issues. And then we are constrained by our funding and the timelines on that funding. So initially we were going to have a new build, which would have been wonderful, but the timeline on that is out of scope. And so we are just today signing off on our lease of an existing build. We have a compressed timeline because all of that's taken some time, but when any project like this, you basically at the very beginning, an engineer, I keep saying, are wonderful for cracking the whip on us for mapping and reporting and accountability if we weren't already. You have an assessment of risk. Every project has a risk register, and we did identify some of these things because we were in the middle of COVID when we did it. So, I mean, probably our biggest risk was COVID, which then actually just equals labour market and supply chain issues. Did we expect it to continue? You'd have to have had a glass ball, wouldn't you? And be as peculiar as it is right now? No. But we risk mitigated in a number of areas. So where we knew cost inflation, supply chain issue, we did a lot of our equipment procurement used, which we were able to do because there were a lot of dispersals as well. So someone else's misfortune is to our advantage. So that was an interesting process, acquiring those pieces. Yeah, we suffered the same delays engineering-wise and all of those, but we've mitigated on supply side with used, on building with an existing fit-up. So we still have a very compressed timeline to have to meet, but we continue to try and mitigate for that, and I think we're well on the way. We've mapped out our installation, commissioning, and deployment, and then phase 2. So we always had the capacity to kind of mix and match, like get the first line and then add pieces. So we shifted fairly quickly in the process at the beginning of this year to stage our installation and our add-ons. So we've actually applied for $4 million additional funding to do some automation that we would have loved to have done in phase 1, but will be in phase 2, which kind of speaks to that labour market issue. Like, you know, it wasn't number 1 on my radar to actually automate everything on day 1. We were interested more in training programs and upskilling, and now the focus is automation. So you have to be adaptable.
Thank you. MLA Reagan, please.
And I think this question is probably for Deputy Farmer. Part of the minister's mandate is to attract and grow innovative, sustainable, and green businesses across the province and support businesses in reducing emissions. So apart from this project, can you speak about some of the other things that the department is doing to meet the minister's mandate?
Deputy Farmer, please.
Yeah, thank you. And so it spans across a number of different areas. But to give a couple of examples, one is the recently changed IRP program. So that has to do with existing businesses, the innovation rebate program that exists in the province. It is a $12 million annual program aimed at improving both productivity and sustainability. And so when we're receiving applications for the IRP program, we're looking for it to touch on both of those things. And we've seen some significant results. So for example, Labatt was a recipient of a IRP program that allowed them, IRP grant that allowed them to offset the cost of their capital improvements, where they were recycling CO2. So it was a situation where they had CO2 leaving and they were buying CO2 to go into their processes and reform the process to recycle the CO2 that was used in their processes. We've had other examples where companies have reduced their water usage or their greenhouse gas emissions individually through the IRP program. And they need to indicate and demonstrate those things. When we talk about attracting innovative and green businesses, part of it is through kind of capability that we've built, that the Verschuren Centre has built and we've supported to become a magnet for those kinds of organizations. There's research and development that's happening in other places. We talked about batteries, and there's a growing battery cluster here, which is supportive of greenhouse gas emission reductions over time. And Novacor has the former Novacor, the investment arm of Invest Nova Scotia now, really places an emphasis on clean tech companies. And though not necessarily in the green tech space, when we've looked at investment attraction through things like payroll rebates, there's been a focus on financial services and ICT. And while they may not be in the clean space, they're clean industries essentially. You're talking about knowledge workers in most cases that don't come with a large carbon footprint along with those efforts. So it's a way to grow the economy in a way that has a low carbon impact. And the more remote work that's an option for some of these, the more it provides an opportunity for people to do their work from different parts of the provinces and reduce some of the commuting time as well. So that's some of the ways, I would say.
Thank you. So now we're going to move on to MLA McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is for the Deputy Minister. So we've set an important goal of 20% of money being spent by Nova Scotians on locally grown and produced food by 2030. What initiatives has the Verschuren, hopefully I said it right, Centre currently engaged to help bolster food production and security in the province?
Deputy Farmer, please.
So I'm just looking at some of the companies that are with Ascend Bio right now, and I'll invite Dr. Mason to fill in. She's more familiar with the individual companies than I am, but as I look at it, the primary focus there is around the turning waste into something that's useful rather than necessarily driving demand. And so it's having a positive impact, but on the other side of the supply chain is the way that I would describe it. But Dr. Mason may have some further comments that are helpful.
Dr. Mason?
Thank you. There's a lot of aspects to the food chain, and some of the key pieces are food security and food safety. We know currently, and the number ranges depending where you look, but potentially, 40% of food is wasted from farm to table. And, with the burgeoning population, one of the most obvious places to target is food waste. And unfortunately, plastics are a piece of that. When something lands in a grocery store, plastic is what gives it shelf life. So one of the things that the Verschuren Centre has worked on is bio-based plastics that enable us not to have to get rid of all things polymer-based, but to actually substitute oil-based plastics for bio-based plastics. And we have a nice marriage actually between our marine extractions where we've taken chitosan, which is a natural biopolymer, and applied that to plastics applications. It gives us all the same types of strengths and breathability that we require to extend food shelf life without being a petrochemical base. So that's one example on the food waste reduction side. On the production side, a number of those companies, as have been mentioned, look at how do we get the same or greater production with less resources, because our agricultural yield outputs have maximized over the last decades, and yet our population continues to grow. So how can we get more for less? And having been on the primary production end of that in my lifetime, I know what that feels like, where you're asked as a producer to keep making more, but do it more environmentally friendly and use less resources. And it's a squeeze, and that's why we're seeing farms disappear. And farm owners' age demographic is diabolical, I would say, at this point. So to do that, we focus on things like inoculums that we can grow, microbial inoculums that will enhance the soil microbiome, which means that when the plant grows, it sucks up more nutrient, or it's more efficient in that nutrient utilization. Cotex, as we've referred to earlier, is a seed and fertilizer coating. So when you apply the fertilizer to the land, less is leached out, less environmental degradation, more efficient use of fertilizer. So our focus is on those technologies that enhance the efficiency of utilization of our resources and reduce degradation that may occur inconsequentially from primary production. And then at the other end of the spectrum, in food reduction, food waste reduction, and in the middle on food security with companies like Krakensense, where we're ensuring that we don't waste food from contamination. So there's a whole load of touch points on the food security sector that we have.
Thank you. MLA McDonald, follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and you touched on it, which is what I happen to, for Hants East, it's basically the dairy capital. So what are you doing for helping the cutting edge for agriculture?
Oh, sorry. Dr. Mason.
Thank you. My background actually is the dairy industry. Oh, awesome. Yeah. I worked for the big cheese in Canada, number 3 in North America. And so, interestingly enough, complete side chain. When I came here, my focus was on marine extractions, but we did that by making use of lactose, which is a co-product. We don't like to say waste, it's a co-product of cheese production. So I actually used to work for the big dairy company. My job was to upvalue all of the lactose deriving from cheese production in Canada and the US. So from the dairy sector's perspective, whey is a massive volume. 90% of the milk that goes into cheese production ends up in whey. From a dairy plant perspective, we fractionate that whey, and you're seeing the same things in the pulse industry in Saskatchewan. We fractionate that then into its sugar and its protein components. The protein is what all you bodybuilders will be consuming as whey protein isolate. And the sugar is lactose, and we use that for fermentation. So on the production side of dairy, finding uses for those co-products is key to sustainability of the industry. Another interesting aside is on the production side, you'll all be aware of the many companies that are hoping to grow seaweeds and of the magical stories of seaweed reducing methane production from dairy cattle. If you go to the UK, you can't sell your milk into Tesco, one of the major retailers, without disclosing your carbon footprint, which they will then lay claim to. So I have friends in the UK with large dairy herds, and they have to reduce their carbon footprint to enable themselves to get their milk on the shelf. And it'll come here, and we're already seeing those ads for dairy industry heading for net zero. There's a lot of things we do with dairy production. One of the big areas that I used to work with, mostly in the States because the operations are larger, is anaerobic digesters and recapture of methane for various other uses. So there are companies that are looking at, the waste side in terms of methane recapture, and also methane output, which dairy cattle and beef cattle have been blamed for, methane being a primary contributor to GHG. And there is some reasonable science behind methane reduction from certain seaweed species. So from a nutrition perspective, we can impact the dairy industry from the end use, and then also from a co-product of cheese production. Our focus is on a circular economy, and it's actually not just a dream, it's a reality. So it's a nice example.
Thank you. MLA Burrell.
Thanks. Deputy Farmer, you probably wouldn't be surprised that I would like to ask you a political question. So when we're talking here about the interface of government economic development support and private sector innovation, in the public discourse in Nova Scotia, the one prominent issue recently has been this transition with the amalgamation of Innovacor and NSBI from a governance board model to an advisory board model. And the Chamber of Commerce here in Halifax, Pat Sullivan, has said, this is a concern because, as he's expressed it, advisory boards don't tend to have the same quality of oversight, and also it's with the advisory board model, both government and also the private sector are exposed to potential criticisms about political involvement. So this sounds to me like a legitimate concern. Does this sound like a legitimate, reasonable concern to you?
Deputy Farmer, please.
So I've been to enough committee meetings that I know my opinions on things are really not relevant to the discussion. My sense of things and my experience has been that ultimately the minister is responsible for what happens in the organizations that she has responsibility for, whether there's a governing board or not. Ultimately, it comes back to the minister. So with this change, that responsibility of the minister is shortened. It's more clear. One of the things that can happen with an external governing board is you are able to leverage the benefits and the connections and knowledge that those folks have. And so the implementation of an advisory board is intended to maintain that value, but they don't necessarily need to concern themselves with, approving the budget of the organization or approving the written version of the business plan. And so with an advisory board, the aim is really to engage those expert advisors in the most efficient way. The minister has always been responsible ultimately for the decisions that get made, and particularly on, like a large payroll rebate, for example, that goes to cabinet over a certain threshold. So there's always been certain mechanisms, and the CEO has a fair degree of day-to-day decision-making that they're enabled to make as well. So I don't think it changes the nature of the decision-making. We're intending to retain the benefits of the external board through the advisory board, and the other part of this, of course, is bringing together of the two organizations so that it's much simpler for one Nova Scotia business to know where they need to go to get support. And I'll say we're seeing some of those benefits today. The Verschuren Centre example is a good one, where we have the former Novacor as partner in Ascend Bio, and we have the former NSBI making introductions to clients and helping them to solve problems through the participants at the Verschuren Centre. I'm quite optimistic about what we're going to achieve with the new Invest Nova Scotia. Be my sort of summation on it.
Thank you. Follow-up, MLA Goro.
Well, I might ask something the same question to you, Dr. Mason. Is you have worked with the former model in the two predecessor organizations, and now with the current model with Invest Nova Scotia. Is this question of a governance board or an advisory board, is this of relevance to the working relationship from the point of view of the centre?
Dr. Mason?
I think it's an advantage to have the combined entity. As I mentioned earlier, we have a large number, and other provinces have the same. We have an investment arm, we have an attraction arm, and to have those groups at the same table, to me, gives us a chance to complete the pipeline together. So we're all working collectively to support the growth of those companies. So, it's an absolute plus. It's not desirable as an entity like ourselves to have a disparate number of entities that we can't, collectively get together with. From a governance perspective, I would say that's not really for me to comment on. But, we have our own, we're a not-for-profit, we had an advisory, now we have a solid board. But either way, from a CEO's perspective, one would look to the board, whether advisory or fiduciary, to provide those external connections and skill sets and feedback that one needs to create strategic approaches to a business plan.
Thank you. MLA Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to turn my attention to something future-looking that I'm fascinated in. So my former life, I was a real estate developer. I built a few homes, and that was what I did before I got into this fantastic opportunity. Last month, I read an article about the University of Maine, and their Advanced Structures and Composite Center had just completed a prototype 3D printed home using wood fibers and bioresins. I'm curious to know if that's anywhere on the Verschuren Center's radar, and if so, can we talk about the possibility that we could see something like that coming to fruition here in our province?
Dr. Mason.
It's absolutely possible. We started a cluster with NGen on smart materials to look at complementary, actually, to the battery energetics, to look at other energetic materials, but also smart materials for industrial applications. The other side of that is our drive to net zero housing as part of our energy program. It's absolutely possible today to make net zero homes. and materials such as those composites only add to the capacity to achieve net zero faster. Net zero being the effect of GHG emission, but also, you know, materials, as we said, that supply chain needs to be green. So if you want to build a net zero home and you use concrete, then you've got a dirty carbon footprint versus if you can use a compressed composite. And they come with added benefits in terms of functionality. So I had an interesting conversation this morning actually about whether we could start to develop something like that in the south end of the province, whereby we pull together some of those technologies and you know, just expand what the Verschuren Centre does into some of those deployment centres. And that's what I would, you know, a future vision. We need to deploy across the province what we do from our little home in Cape Breton.
Thank you. Follow up, MLA Smith.
Yes, a quick one. So net zero homes, great, that they certainly exist, and if people chose to do the work and spend the money, they can certainly build net zero homes. Focusing more on the 3D printed aspect of it, is that something that would be a part and parcel if we were going to advance that type of technology?
Sorry?
Dr. Mason, please.
We don't currently focus on 3D, although there are, you know, smaller entities like I believe the Makerspace has some 3D print capacity. It's at industrial scale. So, I mean, our focus is to get the composite to a stage it could be 3D printed. And then that's an easy deployment because so many things are being manufactured with 3D printing right now. So, yeah, it's absolutely a possibility and an easy play. So.
Thank you. MLA Boudreau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we've heard the term cluster a couple of times from a number of different people today, and got me thinking, you know, about what this cluster would look like. Or, you know, we've invested thinking that this could be what's the possibility of what could happen out of the Verschuren Centre and for, you know, the CBRM area. So, just what is your vision of what that would look like in 5 to 10 years?
Sorry, Dr. Mason. Well, oh, sorry. No, I'm Deputy Farmer, please.
Thank you. So it's, you know, these are forward-looking questions. We're optimistic that when you look, you know, 5 years out, that we could be talking about 20 to 30 companies, new companies, resident, 200 to 300 employees, and all the investment and spin-off that goes along with that. One of the advantages that we have with the model that exists at the Verschuren Centre is that we're getting companies that have moved through the funnel. So if you think about, you know, what goes in the top of the funnel in the startup ecosystem and what comes out at the bottom as a healthy, thriving company, it's a narrowing funnel as you go along. There's a lot at the top. Somebody who's got an idea in a lab somewhere, or somebody who's got an idea and hasn't made it to a lab. Then there's somebody who's got an idea that's been tested and not proven out. And everybody that's arriving at the Verschuren Centre has been through the initial steps, so they're well along. They've got a technology. They've got there's a market for it. They've received some investment. They've got a business plan. So they stand a much greater chance of success than the ones that are at the very top of the funnel. And because you know, that's happening, because we've got this significant demand and pipeline for organizations to come through, there's every reason. And the examples that we've seen, Shaw, Michelin, Copal, you know, a variety of ones just in the early stages of this that are getting traction in Nova Scotia. There's every reason to think that 5-10 years out, we could be talking about hundreds of jobs and significant investment spread around the province. The Moretti reference that I made earlier it talks about a Moretti multiplier and the significant impact of a cluster in a particular area. And it's not an overnight, and there's not a formula that every single job has so many spin-off jobs. But if you look over a long period of time, in an area where there's a technology cluster, not only do you see disproportionately high growth within that cluster, you also see disproportionately high growth in all of the things that serve that directly and indirectly. So if we've got more high-tech businesses located in a particular area, that's good for the caterer. That's good for the accounting firm. That's good for the the people that provide personal services. The benefit spreads out quite wide.
Thank you. Follow up, Emily Boudreau.
No, I mean, I'm fascinated with the whole. It's an exciting time to be in Nova Scotia and Cape Breton, so I'll leave it at that.
Do we have any additional questions?
It's always a great time.
We have 5 minutes left. I'm sorry, MLA Reagan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So if a company has an idea and they need some funding for that, I'm just hearing from people, and they're not clear on how things get funded these days, because we have a shipyard that, and so Dr. Mason, this has nothing to do with you, but we have a shipyard that suddenly was sold to the province, and folks are wondering, how does this happen? Does someone approach the province and say, hey, I've got this opportunity and we need help, or how do you get in the door? And so my question is for the Deputy Minister.
Pardon? Yeah, it doesn't relate to the Verschuren Center. So. Go ahead, Deputy Farmer.
Yeah, so happy to answer sort of generally as it relates to how do you get in the door. We've got an organization in Invest Nova Scotia that's 130 employees that are connected around the province. So we've got regional business development advisors that are situated around the province. We've got staff of Invest that are here, and we've got representation in Cape Breton, and so the multitude of opportunities that exist out there come in different ways. It might be through a regional business development advisor if it's a business that's looking to expand and they're consulting on how they can do that. It might be conversation about how can they access a new market. On the investment side, it might be a company that's pitching to the investment side of Invest, the former Innovacor, that they've got a new widget and that they're requiring some investment. There's also lots of other partners in the environment as well, whether it's BDC or ACOA or on the smaller end, it could be the credit unions or the banks. There's a whole variety of them. So. All that to say, there's many entry points through Invest Nova Scotia, depending on the nature of the client.
Thank you. We have 2 minutes, so go ahead with the follow-up. Verschuren Center. Verschuren Center. Thank you. MLA Reagan, please.
Thank you. So I have a pretty good idea how the Verschuren Center reached out. They were already had a relationship with the government, et cetera, to get funding, and casting zero aspersions on funding Verschuren Center or anything like that. But I'm just, I think people don't understand that how it is that we ended up funding buying a shipyard. When that has clearly not been the direction that government has taken over the past number of years. So could the Deputy Minister speak to how we have great entities like the Verschuren Center being funded through a formalized process, and then something that just seems to be a one-off.
So I'm not going to allow the question. I just think it's too far off our subject. You've got 45 seconds if you want to go ahead. MLA LaChanze.
So earlier, Deputy, you outlined the 4 lenses that guide economic development strategy and policy and, I guess, investment in the province. So I'm wondering, could you provide for the committee at a later date the analysis that was undertaken to buy the Lunenburg shipyard, and particularly highlighting which lens it was seen as a priority investment under?
We're not going down that, we're just too far off for Verschuren Center, and we are out of time for questions. Do we have Dr. Mason first? You have closing comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to appear here and spread a little of our joy and excitement at what we're doing. I think there's lots of growth still to come, and I appreciate all the help that the federal and the provincial governments do to support our private investments towards that end.
Thank you, Dr. Mason, and Deputy Farmer, please.
Yes, I'd just like to thank the committee for the opportunity to join you today on the Verschuren Center.
Thank you all very much. Really, it's been a great topic, very, very, very interesting and informative. So typically we take a quick break here while the panelists leave, but before we do, because we may be done, do we have any other business for this committee? If I don't see any other business, I adjourn the meeting, and I've... What? Oh, this meeting is adjourned.
Flip it over to the next meeting date.
So the next meeting date, for the record, is January 24th of 2023. The success and future of the Nova Scotia Climate Change Fund. Our witnesses will be the Department of Environment and Climate Change, Efficiency One, and Clean Foundation. I adjourn the meeting. Now I get to ask a couple